Welcome back to the Daily Crypto Deep Dive. Firstly, Merry Christmas, and thank you for being here. Whether you're listening on Christmas Day itself, over the holidays, or catching up later, we genuinely appreciate you taking the time to tune in. This channel exists because of the people who listen, comment, share, and stick with these longer, deeper conversations, especially when we slow things down like this. Your support means more than you probably realize. And over the holidays, it feels right to acknowledge that. So from all of us here, Merry Christmas. Thank you for your continued support. And thank you for trusting us to take you through something a little different over these episodes. And that's important, because what we're talking about today sits right at the moment where money becomes something we all live inside, whether we understand it or not. This is the part of the story where money stops being local, stops being personal, and starts becoming systemic. Not yet fully modern, not yet completely detached from reality, but close enough that the consequences begin to shape everyday life in ways most people never consciously connect to money itself. In part 1, we went back to the ancestral roots of money, why it emerged, how barter worked, why gold became important, and why trust and physical reality mattered. In part 2, we explored what happened when money became abstract, when records replaced metal, when trust concentrated power, and how early banking systems like the Knights Templar showed that money could move without physically moving at all. Today, we move into the next phase, the moment when states begin to understand that controlling money is as important as controlling land or armies, and when ordinary people start to feel the effects of decisions made far above their heads, often without any dramatic moment to point to. By the early modern period, roughly the 15th through 18th centuries, Europe is changing rapidly. Trade networks expand across oceans. Exploration connects continents. Colonies form. Empires rise. And crucially, wars become larger, longer, and far more expensive. Medieval conflicts were often seasonal and limited. Early modern wars are continuous, professionalized, and logistical. Armies must be paid regularly. Navies must be maintained constantly. Fortifications, weapons, uniforms, supplies, and transport all require sustained funding. This creates a pressure on money systems that had never existed before. Gold and silver are still the foundation, but now they are moving on a global scale. Vast quantities of silver are extracted from the Americas, particularly from mines like Potosi in modern-day Bolivia. At its peak, Potosi produces more silver than the rest of the world combined. This silver floods into Europe and then flows onward into Asia, especially China, where silver becomes central to taxation under the Ming dynasty. This creates one of the first truly global monetary systems in history, linking miners in South America, merchants in Europe, and tax collectors in Asia. The consequence of this is something many people don't realize. Inflation does not always come from governments printing money. It can come from sudden changes in supply. Historians refer to this period as the price revolution. Over roughly 150 years, prices across Europe rise dramatically. Food, rent, and basic goods become steadily more expensive. Wages lag behind. Fixed incomes are eroded. The wealthy who own land and assets adapt. Ordinary people struggle. So the next question naturally becomes this: why does inflation go up in the first place? And the simplest answer is that inflation rises when more money enters the system, without a matching increase in real goods and services. Imagine an economy where there are 1 million loaves of bread produced each year, and a fixed amount of money used to buy them. Now imagine the amount of money increases, but bread production doesn't. People are competing with more money for the same bread, so prices rise. That same logic applies across an entire economy. Inflation goes up when governments spend more than they collect in taxes, and cover the gap by borrowing. When banks increase lending faster than the economy grows. When central authorities create new money to stimulate growth. Or when supply is disrupted by wars, pandemics, or energy shortages. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it's accidental, but the mechanism is the same. More money or less supply, chasing the same goods. And because money enters the system unevenly, through governments, banks, large institutions, and asset markets first, prices don't rise all at once. They rise where the money lands first, and then ripple outward. By the time everyday costs like food, rent, and energy increase, The process has already been underway for years. At this moment, it is so tempting to get into Bitcoin, but we will hold back until later in the series. At the time, nobody fully understands what is happening. There is no modern economic theory. People blame greed, moral decay, corrupt merchants, or divine punishment. But the underlying driver is monetary. More money is chasing the same amount of goods. Purchasing power falls quietly, year after year. This is one of the first large-scale demonstrations that inflation is not just an economic concept, but a social force that reshapes lives without asking permission. At the same time, governments are learning a critical lesson. Wars are not won solely by bravery or strategy. They are won by financing. A state that can borrow cheaply and reliably can outlast a stronger enemy. This insight changes everything. Instead of relying only on taxes or plunder, states begin to borrow systematically. Public debt emerges not as a temporary measure, but as a permanent feature of governance. This is a radical departure from earlier societies, where rulers who borrowed too much often faced immediate consequences. Now, debt becomes institutionalized. One of the most overlooked consequences of this transition period is how money quietly began to change human behavior itself. Historical records from early modern Europe show a shift in how people thought about time, obligation, and risk. Before abstract money and long-term debt became common, most economic life was seasonal and cyclical. You worked, you harvested, you survived the winter, and then you started again. But once wages, rents, interest, and state taxes became fixed in monetary terms, rather than tied to harvests or output, people were forced into a new relationship with time. Miss a payment, and the consequences were no longer social embarrassment or negotiation, but legal enforcement. This is when clocks start appearing more prominently in towns, when punctuality becomes moralized, when wasting time becomes a sin rather than a luxury. Money doesn't just measure value anymore, it measures behavior. And once money begins disciplining time itself, societies start to reorganize around it in ways that feel natural, even though they are historically very new. One of the most important but least discussed developments of this era occurs in the Dutch Republic. In 1609, the Bank of Amsterdam is established to stabilize trade by providing a reliable unit of account backed by metal deposits. Merchants deposit coins of varying quality and receive bank money credited to their accounts. This bank money is stable, trusted, and carefully managed. For decades, it trades at a premium over circulating coins. This matters because it proves something subtle but powerful. Money does not have to be physical to be trusted. It has to be governed well. But even this system does not escape the gravitational pull of politics. Over time, the Bank of Amsterdam begins lending to the city and to major trading companies like the Dutch East India Company. Reserves quietly decline. Transparency fades. Confidence erodes. Eventually, the bank collapses. The lesson repeats. Even the best designed systems fail once restraint gives way to convenience. England follows a similar path, but with even larger consequences. After repeated defaults by the Crown, confidence in royal finances is low. Then, in 1694, the Bank of England is created. Its primary purpose is not to protect savers or stabilize prices, but to finance government debt. In exchange for lending to the state, the bank gains the right to issue banknotes. This is a turning point in monetary history. These notes are redeemable in gold, but most people never redeem them. They circulate as money in their own right. The state gains the ability to fund wars without immediate taxation. Debt becomes permanent. The idea that national debt should never be paid off, only managed, begins here. This is not widely discussed, but it is essential to understanding the modern world. From this point on, debt is no longer a temporary tool. It is a structural feature of the system. For ordinary people, this transformation is gradual and almost invisible. Paper money becomes normal. Gold fades from daily life. Trust shifts fully toward institutions. Money becomes something you use, not something you question. But beneath the surface, the constraint imposed by physical scarcity is weakening. There are moments when this fragility becomes obvious. Revolutionary France's experiment with assignats, paper money backed by confiscated church lands, begins with optimism and ends in hyperinflation and social chaos. The lesson is always the same. Money systems do not collapse because they are used carefully. They collapse when restraint disappears. By the 19th century, the gold standard emerges as an attempt to restore discipline. Currencies are tied to gold at fixed rates. This brings long-term stability, but at a cost. Economic downturns become harsher. Governments lose flexibility. Political pressure builds. And this is the part most people never hear. The gold standard does not fail because it doesn't work. It fails because it works too well at limiting government behavior. When crises arrive, governments want the ability to spend without immediate consequence. Gold stands in the way, so exceptions are made, suspensions are introduced. Temporarily at first, always temporarily. By the early 20th century, the tension is unavoidable. Industrial economies are too complex, too interconnected, and too politically sensitive to operate under strict monetary discipline. The stage is set for the final transformation, money fully severed from physical reality. Central banks empowered to manage economies, inflation normalized, trust placed entirely in institutions. That is the story of Part 4. Today's episode is about understanding how we got close, how money became nationalized, institutionalized, and normalized as something issued rather than discovered, how inflation stopped being an accident and became a policy outcome, and how ordinary people, without any dramatic event, found themselves living inside a system where the value of their money depends less on nature and more on decisions made in distant offices. If you've ever wondered why savings feel fragile, why prices creep upward, why debt feels unavoidable and permanent, this is where it begins. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the channel. Enjoy the rest of Christmas, and in the next part of this series, we complete the arc. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, follow for part 4, and we will see you at the top.